Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today we're going to talk about Classic Who. Now, recently I did a video talking about the Modern series, and I picked my least favorite story from each series of the Modern series. Not necessarily the one I thought was objectively the worst story, but just my least personal favorite. So now we're going to do that today with Classic Who, where I'm going to talk about my least favorite story, at least currently. Sometimes, especially in Classic Who, my decisions are a bit fluid on which one is my least favorite on any given day. And again, it's not necessarily the one I think is objectively the worst, just the one I think is my personal least favorite, because I do think there's a distinction there. Season 1 actually is a question mark at the moment. I can't quite decide between the Daleks, Edge of Destruction, and the Censor Rights, because it would be between those three, because I really like An Unearthly Child, even the caveman part. I love The Keys of Marinus, even though I've only watched it the one time. I really liked it. I just like how different the episodes are from each other. Marco Polo would be in that running, but I've only seen the 30-minute cut down for it, so I can't really judge it. The Aztecs is very good. I've only seen it the one time. It needs a rewatch, but I did enjoy it. Reign of Terror, you guys know I love. I've watched Reign of Terror 3 or 4 times. I love Reign of Terror. That could be my favorite of the season. So it's really between the other three. You guys know I have an issue with the Daleks. It's just so drawn out, a bit boring at times. I tend to prefer the edited down color version of it, which I know is heresy for a Classic Who fan to say. I know. Somebody's going to beat me up in the streets. And I'll just be there laying on the ground going, fair enough! I had that coming. Now, the Censor Rights, I enjoyed the one time I've seen it. I talked about that in the review, but I also mentioned in that review, one of the things driving me forward was that constant wondering of what's going to happen next. And it definitely isn't one of those stories where I'm like, I'm going to be watching this again in a month. So I knew the Censor Right wasn't going to be a story I was just chomping at the bit to come back to. And by the time I do rewatch it, I'm sure a lot of it will be hazy in my mind. The Daleks, I've actually said I was going to rewatch this year. I still haven't done it. I need to get on that and just maybe watch an episode a day or maybe 2 episodes a day. And I figure maybe if I watch it over the course of like a week, I might appreciate it more instead of trying to power through all 7 episodes in a day or 2. Watch it more the way it was intended, like maybe an episode a day or something. Not necessarily an episode a week, but an episode a day. I might appreciate it more. And then Edge of Destruction, which I'm also just not keen on, except for the ending. I love the ending to it. The ending redeems it, but I'm not keen on the story, even at 2 parts. It's probably between one of those 3. I'm not actually sure where I stand on that right now. For Season 2, I'd say The Web Planet. The Chase is definitely in the runnings for that, and it's really hard to pick between them. But The Chase does have good book-ending episodes. I love the first episode. I love the last episode. And there are some things in between that I enjoy as well, like the scene on the Empire State Building, for example. Whereas The Web Planet, there's some good things in it, don't get me wrong. And I will always respect the ambition behind it. I always have respect for what they tried to do there. But trying to do that on a 60s Doctor Who budget, there is definitely some issues. And it's 6 parts, it's a slog to get through. I think if you had done The Web Planet as a 4-parter, I think there would be a lot more to be forgivable about. But as a 6-parter, it just plods on. Like, it plods on far worse than even the Daleks does. And you know how I feel about the Daleks. So I would probably say my least favorite is The Web Planet. For Season 3, I would probably currently say The Mythmakers. Now, I still haven't seen The Savages. But The Mythmakers, the recon is really hard to get through. The novelization is a pretty nice read, but the recon is very hard to get through. And some of the incidental music, as you guys know, I find atrocious. Now, the Gunfighters, of course, is in the runnings for that. You guys know I don't like the Gunfighters, and some of the music in that is also atrocious. But at least I have that full episode, that full story I can watch if I want to, whereas the recon for Mythmakers is a tough watch. It's a very tough watch. To be honest, Daleks Master Plan would be in that running too. I was not enamored with trying to get through 12 episodes that are mostly recons, to be honest. That and The Feast of Stephen's just terrible. The 3 surviving episodes of it are good. But the recon episodes are really hard to get through. I much prefer the novelization of Daleks Master Plan, which, matter of fact, part 2, the mutation experiment or whatever it's called. I've actually got The Mutation of Time. The book's right down there. My review of that is actually a Patreon exclusive, which if it hasn't gone up soon, will be going up soon. I think it's one of the Sunday exclusives, because Sundays are always Patreon exclusive videos now, is my review of that. But I wouldn't want to say Dalek's Master Plan is my least favorite, because once again, I would get jumped in the streets. So if I ever went and visited the UK, there'd be a welcome party waiting for me. Welcome to Britain, as they kick me on the ground. No, I would say my least favorite for the season would probably be the Myth Makers currently. Season 4 is really hard, because Season 4 to me has no bad stories. Season 4 is my favorite 60s season. I think it's a really good season. I think none of the stories are bad. I find them all enjoyable. So it's really hard to pick a least favorite, since I like all of them. I would probably say the Faceless ones. While I still enjoy the Faceless ones, I just enjoyed the other stories this season more, because I really like the Smugglers. 10th Planet is close. I almost picked 10th Planet for this, but I think I enjoyed 10th Planet a little more than I do Faceless ones. I love Power, of course. I love the Highlanders. I like Underwater Menace. I like the Moon Base a lot. I love the Macroterra, and I love Evil of the Daleks. So it's more just the least one that I like. It literally is a case of being my least favorite, as in I still like it for this one. And the animation for it's pretty good as well. Season 5 is also kind of a hard pick, because it's hard for me to pick my least favorite. From an actual story standpoint, I would say the Ice Warriors or the Wheel in Space, they're the most uninteresting. But Wheel in Space is less complete, and the recon for it is harder to watch, whereas Ice Warriors is mostly complete and has a good animation. And then you also have Fury in the mix, which has a far superior story. Fury has a fantastic story, but it has a very, very piss-poor animation. Nothing against the animators. I'm not meaning to be insulting to them. I think a lot of this was down to the stylistic choice that was chosen by the director and time. I really feel like Fury from the Deep really suffers from having to be out by a certain time. I feel like the time constraints really hurt it. So I don't mean to be offensive to any of the animators involved. I think it's just a victim of budget and time constraints. But as a result, I really dislike this animation, and it kind of makes Fury from the Deep my least favorite story of the season, while actually thinking the story itself could be the best story of the season. I actually really love the actual story. The animation just really pulls it down for me. This is one I almost wish I had the CD audio of. I mean, I've watched the reconstruction of it and like it, but this is something I'd love to get like the audio of, so I could listen to in the car, because my car does have a CD player. I could like listen to on the way to work. I think I'd really enjoy that. If anyone ever wants to send a CD copy of Fury from the Deep, I'd love to do a review of that. So that's really hard to pick for Season 5, because what constitutes my least favorite is very much affected by missing episodes and what I'm judging least favorite by. Season 6, you kind of run into that as well, because it's hard to pick between the Space Pirates and the Dominators. The Dominators, while being complete, has a rubbish story. It's probably my least favorite Troughton. Just going on story, it's probably my least favorite. But at the same time, it's one of the few complete Troughton stories we have. We only have 7 complete Troughton stories. And so it gets a couple points just for being in that rarity. Whereas the Space Pirates Recon is very hard to get through. Progressively hard to get through, with 5 episodes missing out of 6. No telesnaps. It's a very hard watch. While I think the actual story is far better than the Dominators, considering the novelization of the Space Pirates is a really good read. I mean, if I had to pick, I would probably call my least favorite the Dominators, simply because the novelization of the Space Pirates exists, and it does really help that story a lot because of the difficulty of sitting through the recon of it. Season 7 is really hard to pick these days between Silurians and Ambassadors of Death. I think all 4 stories in Season 7 are very good. I like all of them. I feel like Silurians drags a little bit. It gets a little boring in places, honestly, and drags a bit. Ambassadors of Death is also too long. I don't think it's as too long as it used to be. I used to think it was a solid 4-parter. Now I think you could do it in 5 or 6 parts, maybe. I think it's maybe 1 or 2 parts overly long. I think both of them suffer from needing an updated restoration. The colors just look not good on both of them. They both need fresh restorations, which we know they'll be getting for the Season 7 box set, which of course is rumored to be the next set in the collection range. But it's really hard for me to pick between them. That would depend on my mood. Between Silurians and Ambassadors of Death, which just goes to show how much Ambassadors of Death has grown on me with my last watch. Someone sent it to me. I actually don't remember who sent it. Someone sent me a copy of Ambassadors of Death a few months ago, and so I actually got to rewatch it for the first time in a while. And my opinion of it really shot up with that rewatch. I have a newfound appreciation for that story, which I had always kind of appreciated the story itself. Even back when I used to talk about my issues with it, my main complaint was always it was too long, and that I enjoyed the story. And that's still true in the fact that I do really like the story. And I still think it's a little too long, just not as much too long as I think it used to be. I don't think it needs to be cut down to 4 parts now. Although an omnibus of this story would be an interesting watch. If you could make that work and still have the story make sense. I can't remember who actually sent me that, but a special thank you to whoever sent me Ambassadors of Death. Season 8 is easily The Claws of Axos. You guys know The Claws of Axos is probably my least favorite Pertwee story. While still being good, all of the Pertwee stories are good. He doesn't have a bad story. Just kind of my least favorite of the season in what is a very good season. Series 9 is a little trickier because it's probably between the mutants and the Sea Devils. Excuse me. The mutants I actually enjoyed on my first watch, but again, it was that situation of what's going to happen next was kind of carrying me through. I don't know how much I would enjoy it on a rewatch since I've only watched it the one time. Although I do like some of the cast in it. Like, I really like the guy kind of playing the head bad guy, the one always talking into the wand. That guy's great. He's really good in this role. I don't know if he's in any other episodes of Doctor Who or not, but he's really good here. And then I really like the mutant designs. The actual mutants, their costumes are really good. And then, of course, I love the race allegories and the how it's talking about the dangers of racism. Classic Who does that kind of thing very, very well. And I love how well they touched on that here. I think they did it in a very, very good manner. So it's hard for me to say between that and the Sea Devils. Sea Devils I've seen several times. And just for some reason, I don't quite like it as much as I used to. I still think it's a good story. I just don't think I quite like it as much as I used to. So it's really hard for me to pick between those two. And of course, I really need to give the Time Monster a rewatch as well. I've only seen it the one time. Season 10, Planet of the Daleks. This is another one in the runnings for my least favorite Pertwee story. Again, I don't think it's a bad story. I'm just not as enamored with it as I am most of the Pertwee era. It's definitely got some strong things going on in it, but it's also one of those rare stories where I prefer the original effects over the updated effects. This is the poster child of I prefer the original effects for me. There's only 2 or 3 stories I prefer the original effects, but this is definitely one of them. Season 11 is a little trickier. Parts of me want to say Monster of Peladon, but I actually really like what it does with Sarah Jane. She has very good character development in it. I would probably say Planet of the Spiders, because I find Planet of the Spiders, while not bad, to be a little underwhelming, especially for a regeneration story, especially for a Pertwee era regeneration story. I feel like it's not as good as it should have been for Pertwee's regeneration story. It's a really hard pick, though. It's a very strong season for me. I actually find Season 11 to be a bit underrated. Season 12, I would say the Sontaran Experiment. I like all of Season 12. It's one of my 2 favorite seasons in all of Doctor Who. And Sontaran Experiment is very much a 2-parter that knows it only needs to be a 2-parter. That's more a situation of just me liking the other 4 stories better, because, of course, I love Revenge of the Cybermen. I think it's very underrated. I think it doesn't get enough credit, and the location work in the caves is fantastic, even if it does have a planet-sized plot hole in it. A gold planet-sized plot hole. So I would say Sontaran Experiment. Season 13, my other favorite season, and probably the best season the show's ever done objectively, I would still say The Android Invasion, while still being great. Not just good, but great. It's a great story. I think it's just outshined by the other stories in that season. I think most people in this, for Season 13, would either pick Planet of Evil or Android Invasion. And I think most of them would pick them with the asterisk being that they're still really good stories, They're just weaker stories in a season that is just stuffed with amazing stories. I think if Android Invasion and Planet of Evil were in other seasons, they would be highlights of those seasons. And personally, Planet of Evil is just underrated to me anyway. I love it. It's one of my favorites of the season. I put it above Brain of Morbius. It's just such a strong season with Brain of Morbius, Seeds of Doom, Pyramids of Mars. And there's just Terror of the Zygons. It's just such an iconic season. It's hard to pick a weakest, but I would say Android Invasion. I think for season 14, it would have to be Hand of Fear. Robots of Death was really on my mind because Robots of Death is a little overrated for me. I love the designs, but the story, after you've seen Robots of Death a couple times, I just find the story a bit boring. But it has to be Hand of Fear, simply how it kind of collapses in episode 4. First 3 episodes are really solid, and episode 4 does redeem itself a bit at the end with that farewell scene between the Doctor and Sarah Jane, which is really, really good. But I think most of episode just kind of falls apart, and it just kind of loses me before we get to that goodbye speech. So it's definitely my least favorite of the season. Moving into the Williams era with season 15, it's got to be the Invasion of Time for me. Now, the updated effects from the DVD that are, of course, carried over onto the Blu-ray do help a little bit. They do make it a better watch. But the lack of budget is just so apparent on the screen, even more so than usual for Doctor Who, that it does kind of pull away from the story. Certain things like the TARDIS interior shots and stuff like that. It's just not realized as well as I wish it had been. And I think season 15 is an underrated season. There's definitely some classic stories in there. Horror of Fang Rock, Image of the Findal, and Sunmakers come to mind. Underworld's very underrated. Invisible Enemy I'm also not overly keen on, but I do think it probably inches out Invasion of Time just a little. So I'd say Invasion of Time is my least favorite. Season 16, of course, is Power of Crawl. You guys know that. That's not a surprise. Power of Crawl is definitely my least favorite of the season. Easy peasy for me to pick. My least favorite Tom Baker story. Season 17 is a little harder because I like all of the stories to one degree or another. I would probably say Nightmare of Eden. It's just not quite as interesting to me as the others. It definitely has its moments. It's not a bad story by any means, but I find myself probably getting a little more bored in it than I would any of the other stories. So I would probably call that one my least favorite. Season 18 is definitely The Leisure Hive. It's one of the rare, what I'd call bad Tom Baker stories. It's still watchable, but I don't really think it's that good. It just doesn't do a lot for me. Moving into the Fifth Doctor's era with season 19, it's got to be Kinda. Easily my least favorite of the season. Even Time Flight's better. I much prefer Time Flight. Now, in Kinda's defense, the second half is considerably better than the first half. The back half of the story is not bad at all. It actually gets enjoyable. But that front half just doesn't do much for me. Just not a big fan of Kinda. Give me Time Flight any day. Season 20 is very hard for me because I like all of season 20. Season 20 is my favorite Davison season. I don't think any of the stories are bad. Of course, I lump 5 Doctors in with season 20. I consider it part of season 20. My least favorite is probably a toss-up between Terminus and Maldron Undead, just depending on my mood. Terminus really benefits with its updated effects from the DVD, which of course are also on the Blu-ray, which I do think helps it, and I do enjoy the story well enough, even if it is a bit forgettable. Maldron Undead, I don't know. Some of the design choices are very good. Some of the design choices don't really work for me. It's nice having the Brigadier back. I like watching the Brigadier interact with the modern companions. It's a great introduction for Turlough. I always love Valentine back as the Black Guardian. He's great. He just has that cool voice. Just for some reason, it's hard to pick a least favorite when it's a season I like, but it's possibly Maldron Undead. Probably between Terminus and Maldron Undead, just depending on my mood. Season 21, Warriors of the Deep. That's easy. Warriors of the Deep. Give me Warriors of the Deep even over Twin Dilemma. I need to rewatch Warriors of the Deep. I've only seen it the one time, and I am currently kind of catching a Cliff Notes version of it because I'm watching Jess's videos on Seska Says, and she's reviewing it right now as I'm recording this. So I'm kind of getting a omnibus cut of it, rewatching or watching her on that. But I'm probably not going to rewatch the story as a whole till the season 21 box set comes out. That's kind of a promise I made myself. Same thing with Resurrection. I'm also not a huge fan of Planet of Fire either. Although that's another one where it's a rare case where I do prefer the original effects for Planet of Fire over the updated effects, which don't really work. Planet of Fire is just kind of for me. But I definitely think Warriors of the Deep's my least favorite. I'll even take Twin Dilemma over it. Twin Dilemma is by no means great, but it has a couple things it does I like that Warriors of the Deep doesn't have. Season 22 is also kind of a tough choice because I like all of the episodes to one degree or another. I mean, I don't think season 22 has any bad ones. Possibly Time Lash. Especially if I was having to go just with the regular effects, but I think the updated effects do help Time Lash a lot. Plus, I just love Paul Darrow in it. So possibly Time Lash, but maybe Vengeance on Varos. For some reason, the last time I watched Vengeance, it just didn't do as much for me as it normally did. Now that I've seen all of the Colin era, all of the Sixth Doctor era, because I love Attack. It can't be that one. I love Two Doctors because I like having Troughton back, even if it is a little overly long, and they don't utilize Troughton as well as I wish they had. I love Mark of the Ronnie, my favorite Colin story, at least in the TV series. And I like Revelation of the Daleks. So it's really hard to pick a least favorite, but it would probably either be Time Lash or Vengeance, just depending on my mood. I find Time Lash to be more fun, but I find Vengeance to be better made, if that makes sense. Season 23, Mind Warp. I'm just not a big fan of Mind Warp. I don't like the ending of it at all. I'm glad they retconned that ending because I hated that ending. I love the fact it's got Syl back, and I love the fact it's got Brian Blessed in it, but that's really about all it has going for it for me. Season 24, gotta be Delta and the Bannerman. You guys know I'm not a big fan of Delta and the Bannerman. It's the only, what I would call, bad McCoy story. I love all of McCoy's other stories to one degree or another. I enjoy at least all of his other stories to one degree or another. Delta is just kind of the one stinker in the bunch for me. And it still does some good stuff. I really like Riley a lot. But just overall, I don't really care for Delta. Very confusing story, really. Season 25, Greatest Show in the Galaxy, which again is another one of those stories where I think the back half is much better than the front halves. Those first two episodes I don't really care for, whereas the last two episodes actually get really good for the most part. They still have things I can nitpick, but they're really, really good. It has a great art direction it takes too, as well. And some good performances and some good casting. I mean, Ian is just great as the Chief Clown. He really is. But just the other stories I like better. I find Silver Nemesis underrated. I mean, Remembrance is a classic for a reason. And I love Happiness Patrol, my favorite of the season. Just a really, really, really good story. So my least favorite would be Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Very overrated story. And then season 26, it's kind of a toss-up between Battlefield and Survival, because I think Ghostlight and Curse of Fenric are just flat-out classics. They're just amazing stories. Battlefield, I think, is pretty good. I think the incidental music hurts it a lot, but I think it's pretty good. And sometimes the fighting looks a little stagey, like a little theatrical to me. But I don't know, Survival also feels a little overrated. Well, while you do have some good performances, especially from Anthony Ainley, Sylvester McCoy, and Sophie, there are aspects of it that I feel like make me think it gets a little more credit simply for being the last story. If I had to choose, I'd probably say Survival is my least favorite. I enjoy all four stories. Season 26 is an amazing season. It has no bad stories. But Survival would probably be my least favorite, with Battlefield just kind of squeaking above it slightly. So that's kind of me ranking my least favorite classic Who stories. I want to know what you think of my list and which ones would be your least favorite. Not necessarily the objective worst in your opinion, but your least favorite. Comment down below. And let's talk about it. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button as well. I also have a Patreon. If you would like to support me on that, there's a link to that down in the description below. I want to give a shout out to a couple of my top tier patrons, Colin Coney and Sam Venning. I appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. It's very much appreciated. All of my YouTube members as well. Very much appreciated. I also have a P.O. box if there's anything you'd like to send me to look at and review. A link to my Amazon wish list is down there. A link to my Amazon UK wish list is also down there. Check those out. I update those regularly. Most importantly, thank you for watching.